The Tesla Semi really pulled 82,000 pounds, and that is why the entire trucking industry stopped scrolling and started paying attention. But here's the thing nobody is telling you clearly. That number is not the story. The story is bigger and stranger than a single impressive figure. For the first time in the history of heavy-duty trucking, an electric truck has started proving in real operations on real roads hauling real freight that it can do work that for decades belonged exclusively to diesel. Not in a lab, not in a press event with confetti and a stage light, in actual fleets on actual routes carrying actual cargo for actual companies that do not care about hype, only about whether the truck shows up on time and keeps the lights on at the warehouse. So let us start with the number everyone quotes because it deserves a closer look before we go anywhere else. 82,000 pounds is the gross vehicle weight figure that shows up in reporting tied to PepsiCo routes, the kind of weight class used in real long-haul heavy freight work. But here is the honest part, the part a lot of channels skip because it kills the clickbait. There is no single independently documented public test with full chain of custody with a stopwatch and a scale and a camera crew confirming exactly 82,000 pounds of cargo on one truck for one measured run. Tesla themselves back in 2022 said the Semi completed cargo runs and could travel 500 miles on a single charge, but the company never released a full breakdown of what exactly was on that trailer. So the honest read is this: the Semi has operated near or at that heavy weight class in real service. But the viral 82,000 pound headline moment, the one everyone imagines, a single dramatic haul filmed and verified like a world record attempt. That specific version does not exist in the public record. And that gap between the myth and the paperwork is exactly why we are digging into this today. Because gross vehicle weight and payload are not the same thing, and that distinction matters more than people realize. Gross vehicle weight is the total number, truck plus trailer plus cargo plus everything else strapped onto the frame. Payload is what is actually inside, the goods being delivered, the thing a company is paying to move. A truck can hit a big total number with a heavier tractor and still be carrying less freight than people assume. So when you hear 82,000 pounds, you are hearing about the class of operation the Semi was working in, not a confirmed, itemized, publicly verified cargo manifest. That nuance does not make the achievement smaller. If anything, it makes it more interesting, because it means the real story is not a single flashy stunt. It is sustained operation at heavy weight, over and over, in the unglamorous grind of actual freight delivery. And that grind is where the Tesla Semi has quietly built its credibility. PepsiCo remains the clearest, best documented customer, and the numbers around that relationship tell a story of real but constrained adoption. Reporting shows PepsiCo ordered 100 trucks, with first deliveries beginning in December of 2022. Later reporting confirmed the company expanded its California electric fleet with 50 Tesla Semis for operations there. But here's the part that keeps this grounded in reality instead of marketing fantasy. As of 2024, PepsiCo had only received 36 semis. 36 out of an order for 100. That is not a company drowning in electric trucks. That is a company carefully, slowly integrating a new technology into a business that cannot afford disruption. Supply is still the bottleneck. Tesla Semi production remains far below the volume of a mainstream truck manufacturer, and that single fact tells you this technology, while proven, is still in its early operational chapter, not its mass market chapter. Now let us talk about the numbers that actually matter to a fleet manager, because payload headlines get the clicks, but efficiency numbers get the purchase orders. Tesla's own claim is under 2 kilowatt hours per mile and up to 500 miles of range, using high-power charging infrastructure built around their megacharger and megawatt charging system approach. That is the marketing claim. Here is the independent reality check. PepsiCo has cited real-world efficiency around 1.7 kilowatt hours per mile in actual operations. The North American Council for Freight Efficiency, known in the industry as NACFE, studied PepsiCo's trucks in the field and documented individual runs of roughly 335 miles, 295 miles, and 377 miles. And in 2025, a completely separate operator, ABF Freight, ran a pilot program and reported 1.55 kilowatt hours per mile across 4,494 miles of real service. Sit with that for a second. 4,494 miles. That is not a demo. That is not a single carefully choreographed showcase run with a favorable route and perfect weather. That is a trucking company putting the vehicle through the exact kind of unglamorous, repetitive, economically scrutinized work that diesel trucks have dominated for a century, and getting numbers that hold hold up. And ABF Freight is not Tesla. They are an outside operator with no incentive to inflate a competitor's product for marketing purposes. When a third-party fleet, one with zero stake in Tesla's stock price, publishes efficiency numbers that closely track what Tesla and PepsiCo have claimed, that is the moment skepticism starts to soften into cautious respect. But efficiency on flat highway miles is only half the story of heavy trucking. The other half is hills, because hills are where diesel trucks work hardest and where batteries either prove themselves or fall apart. This is where the Tesla Semi has generated some of its most talked about performance data. Tesla has claimed 0 to 60 miles per hour in 20 seconds while fully loaded, along with strong hill climbing performance. And outside reporting has repeatedly highlighted the truck's regenerative braking on descents, essentially recovering energy on the way down a mountain instead of just burning brake pads. The NACFE study on PepsiCo's trucks is particularly valuable here because it captured highway running, long route cycles, and heavy load conditions rather than a scripted acceleration stunt on a closed track. That said, and this is important for keeping this documentary honest, neither Tesla nor the independent reporting released a full public payload sheet for those specific runs. So the acceleration numbers and the hill climbing performance are more strongly supported by outside evidence than the exact payload figures are. We are not going to pretend otherwise. Now here's where the story gets less flattering, because every honest investigation has to include the trade-offs. Charging remains the single biggest operational headache for the Tesla Semi, and it is not close. Reporting from Inside EVs covering the NACFE study documented a Semi taking 55 minutes to charge from 18% to 80% using a high-speed charger. 55 minutes. Compare that to a diesel truck, which can be refueled in the time it takes a driver to grab a coffee and use the restroom. 55 minutes is workable if your freight cycle has natural dwell time, if your routes are predictable, if you can schedule depot charging around driver breaks and warehouse loading windows. But it is a real constraint, and it explains why the Semi has found its footing in regional and captive fleet work rather than unrestricted, spontaneous, coast-to-coast, long-haul trucking. So how did the rest of the trucking industry react to all of this? Here is the honest answer, and it is less dramatic than you might expect, but arguably more meaningful. There is no strong evidence that major manufacturers like Daimler Truck, Volvo Trucks, PACCAR, or Navistar publicly treated the Tesla Semi's heavy load performance as some kind of industry-ending shockwave. Nobody held an emergency press conference. Nobody announced diesel was dead by Friday. The reaction has been closer to quiet, careful observation than panic. But here is the tell, the detail that matters more than any public statement. Every one of these companies is already building or expanding their own battery electric Class 8 truck programs and charging infrastructure. That is not a coincidence, and it is not something companies do lightly, because building an entirely new powertrain platform and a supporting charging network costs enormous amounts of money and years of engineering time. Companies do not spend billions of dollars reacting to something they consider a gimmick. The industry did not panic publicly, but its checkbook tells a different story than its press releases. Let us put the Tesla Semi and a modern diesel Class 8 truck side by side, because a fair comparison is more useful than a highlight reel. On energy costs, the Tesla Semi tends to come out ahead in situations where electricity is affordable and charging is well managed, while diesel costs remain tied to volatile fuel markets. PepsiCo has cited roughly a 23% fuel cost reduction compared to their most efficient diesel trucks, which is a significant number for a company that runs thousands of delivery routes. On maintenance, the electric truck likely benefits from having fewer moving parts, though fleet-scale long-term maintenance data is still limited simply because these trucks have not been on the road as long as diesel platforms with decades of service history behind them. On refueling versus recharging, diesel wins clearly and immediately, with fast, ubiquitous infrastructure everywhere versus a charging network that is still being built out. On torque and acceleration, electric power is genuinely competitive, even impressive, thanks to instant torque delivery that diesel engines simply cannot match in the same way. On payload, both are workable, but the Tesla Semi's exact verified public payload numbers remain less transparent than the well-understood flexible payload ratings of modern diesel trucks. And on uptime at scale, meaning how reliably a company can run a large fleet without disruption, diesel currently holds the advantage, limited mainly by the maturity of infrastructure and vehicle supply on the electric side? Here's a question worth sitting with because it is the one that actually decides where this industry goes next. If an electric truck can already match or beat diesel on energy cost and performance in the right routes, is the remaining barrier really about the technology at all? Or is it entirely about supply, charging infrastructure, and how fast manufacturers can scale production? Because if it is the second one, that is not a permanent wall. That is a countdown clock. And countdown clocks tend to move faster than industries expect, especially once competitors start racing each other instead of racing the calendar. The honest limits are still real, and pretending otherwise would make this documentary propaganda instead of investigation. Supply remains constrained, with PepsiCo waiting years to receive a fraction of its original order, and Tesla's semi-production volume still far below what a mainstream truck manufacturer produces. Charging infrastructure, particularly high-power depot charging and the broader megawatt charging system rollout, is still developing, even as the wider industry works to build it out. Battery weight, vehicle price, service network coverage, and the simple need for predictable, plannable duty cycles all continue to limit how widely this technology can be adopted right now. That is why the Tesla Semi's strongest use case today is regional haul, captive fleets that return to the same depot every night, and carefully planned routes, not unrestricted, spontaneous coast-to-coast freight work. The truck is promising. It is not yet universally scalable, and anyone telling you otherwise is selling something. So where does that leave us? The fair, evidence-based verdict is this. The Tesla Semi did prove something genuinely important. An electric Class 8 truck can do real work in real fleets with genuinely competitive efficiency and with enough range to matter for selected, well-planned operations. That is not a small thing. For decades, heavy freight was considered diesel's unshakable territory, the one corner of transportation electrification skeptics said could never be touched. What the Semi has not yet proven is that electric trucks have fully conquered the economics, the infrastructure, and the production scale required to take over the long-haul market completely. The achievement is real. The takeover is not finished. And the honest headline is not that diesel is dead. It is that electric trucking earned a legitimate seat at the table, backed by independent data from operators who have nothing to gain from exaggerating. For traditional trucking executives, the things that matter most are not headline weight numbers or acceleration claims. What matters is uptime, depot economics, serviceability, and the ability to scale a fleet without unpredictable downtime. On those fronts, the Tesla Semi is still in its proving phase, still building the track record that will eventually convince the most conservative fleet buyers in the industry. But proving phases end. Technologies that survive real-world fleet testing with real companies, real routes, and real economic pressure tend to keep improving, not disappear. The 82,000-pound headline was never really the point. The point is that a truck built on a completely different powertrain philosophy walked onto diesel's home turf, took on some of the heaviest, least forgiving work in commercial transportation, and did not fall apart. That is why the industry is watching. Not because of one dramatic number, but because the boring, repetitive, unglamorous data keeps holding up mile after mile. To not get caught off guard by what is coming next in this industry, whether it is the next charging breakthrough, the next fleet pilot program, or the next manufacturer forced to respond, join us here at Driven to Distraction, because the garage of the future is being decided right now, in quiet pilot programs most people are not paying attention to yet.